Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I am Bridget Anderson, the President and CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. And welcome to our series of business resiliency webinars on navigating COVID-19. Today, we are going to be focused on going from crisis to recovery and understanding and managing a new normal. In this time of unprecedented uncertainty, we want to be sure that our members and the broader business community can find answers to their most pressing questions. Through a series of free webinars, experts will provide guidance and answer questions to help companies navigate these challenging times. We encourage you to take part in this discussion. You can engage with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram by using the hashtag GVBOT. And we are also using Slido so you can submit your questions, and all you need to do is go to slido.com in your internet browser or on your phone, and then you enter the password for GVBOT recovery. Now, before we start, and especially in these challenging times, we want to thank our long-standing partners called our Pillar Partners. They include TELUS, CN, YVR, BCIT, and Air Canada. We are grateful for the support of these 5 organizations whose annual partnerships and commitments enable the important work of the Board of Trade. Thank you as well to our preferred media partner, Business in Vancouver. Now, today we are joined by Peter Dent, partner and Canadian leader in crisis management at Deloitte. He has over 23 years experience in crisis management. And with Peter, we are joined by Christian Kittleson, partner financial advisory, national Indigenous practice leader, and value creation services lead at Deloitte. Christian is experienced in leading large-scale public and private sector organizational transformations and leading change management. Peter, crisis to recovery is certainly what many businesses are feeling during the last several weeks. So I'm going to start things off with you, and then we'll get to Christian, and we'll open it up to a Q&A. So Peter, please go ahead.
Thank you, Bridget, and thank you to all of your listeners as well. Certainly something to get used to, delivering these topics via remote webcams, but certainly something we're all becoming accustomed to. And everything I'm going to talk about today, is really under the banner of all of my crisis management learnings over the years. Is that there's an old adage, and that old adage is that no matter how bad things are, or they appear to be, it is possible to actually make things worse by how you respond to it. And that is something that I've found time and time again as I have been out there assisting governments or other organizations as they respond to a crisis events. And this is a unique crisis. And it's a unique crisis because it's how slow moving it is. And it's so slow moving that on a daily basis, but also on a weekly basis, we're constantly being inundated or provided new bits of information that are changing our entire approach as to how we manage this situation. That makes it extremely unique in terms of a crisis response, because usually with a crisis response, whether it's a cyber event or natural disaster or an integrity event or something like that, it's a finite response. And you can get your arms around that response fairly quickly. And so the response might last days, it might last a week or two before you move into the recovery phase. But this one, for many organizations, it continues to be a responsive sort of way of dealing with it. And so as we move on to the next slide, you'll see with respect to how we recommend clients deal with a crisis situation. So what you're looking at right now is what we refer to as the crisis wheel. And at the center of that crisis wheel is the crisis management leader within the organization. Normally, that individual does not have any other responsibilities with respect to how they're dealing with their day-to-day work. And that is because with a crisis of this magnitude, other distractions interfere with their ability to digest the information that's coming in on a timely basis. And so, it interferes with the ability for them to think about the crisis holistically and give advice or guidance to or within the organization in terms of how to move or how to react to the different bits of information. So when I talk about that, first of all, I'll say that it's not too late to set up one either if you don't have a command structure in place. And it's also not too late to actually test whether or not, or stress test whether or not your command structure is actually working in the manner in which you're hoping that it is operating. But let's talk about, what I mean by a holistic strategy. Well, when you're dealing with a matter like this, and on a day-to-day basis, you'll be making different business decisions. But for example, if you're making talent decisions right now, or decisions around human resources, then it's not just a talent decision that you're making. You're making a financial decision, you're making a legal decision, you're making a communications decision, you're also managing stakeholder inputs. So it's very important to have an overall perspective as to how one decision impacts another. And so, and that drives that holistic decision-making methodology or approach. So and I only want to talk about a couple of items with respect to going around the crisis wheel in terms of the interest of time. The first is that, I'll come back to it, is that the stress testing of your command structure. You can reach out to experts in this area or also peers, or become part of a roundtable. I've already had discussions with the heads of crisis management teams for different organizations, just to stress test, just to evaluate whether those decisions that they're making, that approach or methodology that they have, is as holistic as possible in the circumstance. The other one is communications. I can't stress enough how important communications are at a time like this. Communications not only to your own people about health and safety, but communications to your supply chain, to your customers, to your stakeholders, to those in terms of your financial services, around all of the aspects that are keeping your business running at a moment like this. It's also important not to be inconsistent in those communications. So you can't be saying one thing to your own people and then be saying something completely different to the outside world, because the reality is, in this day of social media, it is quite possible for those two messages to converge in the public domain. And that, of course, impacts your ability to maintain the trust that you have built up over the years as an organization. But all of this, of course, is to say that response period, while we don't know when we will cease responding, as the days and the weeks go by, there's that time that you need to start shifting your strategy towards recovery. And so I want to turn it over to my colleague, Christian, who can have a little bit further discussion around the recovery strategy.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks to everybody for making some time today in your schedule. And first and foremost, I hope you're all healthy and in a safe place. We are certainly in crisis right now. There's no doubt about it. And in terms of preparing for that crisis, Peter has talked a lot about what you can do to manage that crisis. We will get to a place of recovery. The question is, when will that happen, and what do we need to do in order to prepare ourselves for that inevitable recovery? Between crisis and recovery is probably a period of survival. And question is, how long is that survival going to take? Is it 4 weeks? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Certainly, we're seeing all kinds of different forecasts right now from our chief economist and from other economists, not only here in British Columbia, but also nationally and globally. There are a few things that we need to do right now from a financial perspective within your organizations, no matter how big they are or how small they are. For sure, and if we can go to the next slide, that would be great. We've included a lot of items here, and we can go into detail on those or touch them on the questions. I want to talk about some of the key priorities. First of all, cash flow. Cash is going to be key for your recovery and certainly for your survival right now. We also want to talk about your stakeholder management and what's involved with that stakeholder management. We want to talk about your funding solutions. We want to talk about contingency and scenario planning. And then we want to think about our contracts that we have in place. So first and foremost, let's talk about cash flow. We are doing a lot of work right now in terms of real-time cash flow forecasting. And the cash flow forecasts that most of our organizations typically are doing on an annual basis may look out and at a high level for a year. we're talking about 13-week cash flows, daily views on those cash flows for certainly the next 2 to 4 weeks. Making sure that we have great visibility of where our cash is, where our cash is going, where it's coming from, and making sure that we are actively looking at all of the levers that we can press and pull on a daily basis to be able to make those best management decisions during this very uncertain time. So first and foremost, survival is at stake. There are no sacred cows. We need to take a good hard look at our variable costs, stop all discretionary spending during this time. We need to think about postponing all of our expansionary CapEx, and we need to think about making sure that our cash is as flexible as possible. We need to think about the contractors that we have. We need to think about some of those permanent staff and consider what is in the future for those permanent staff. Obviously, we want to stop the hiring process, freeze the hiring, and then take tight control of your cash. So in terms of that authorization of payments, who is actually making those authorizations within this very critical time? It should be one person who has very good viewpoint on where all those expenditures are going. Making sure that we're having daily meetings on what payments to make and what payments not to make. And that sort of flows into our stakeholder and client and vendor management as well. Are you having those regular conversations with both your clients and with your suppliers? You have long-standing relationships that are going to need to be in place once we get through this. And your relationship and the type of relationship that you have at the end of this is going to have a direct connection on how you're reacting right now. So are you having communication regularly with your stakeholders? Your stakeholders could be lenders, shareholders, employees, suppliers, customers, and other authorities. Making sure that you understand what position you're in and what position they're in and what position that puts you in together. We're making sure that we're talking to whatever source of funding solutions. There's a lot of government support, as you know. We saw some more measures that came out this morning that the Prime Minister spoke to in terms of support for employees. Do you understand what those supports are from a business perspective? We're seeing significant opportunities from Business Development Canada, from Export Development Canada as well. Do you understand what those services and what those supports that are out there for companies, no matter their size? That's a key aspect of making sure that we're going to survive and get on our way to recovery. Contingency planning, scenario planning, certainly a little bit different from sort of your low, medium, and high scenario plans. There's a lot of moving parts that are taking place right now. Things are changing on a daily basis, and making sure that those scenarios are updated on a regular basis to understand what's actually changing within the economy on a daily basis is critical. And the last point that I'll talk a little bit about is your contracts. Do you understand what the legal implications of the contracts that you have in place are? In terms of your contracts with your suppliers, in terms of contracts with your clients, do you understand the intricacies of each of those contracts and what the implications of some of the decisions you're going to need to make during the survival period are going to have on the long term? So those are kind of the high-level aspects that I wanted to touch base with, and certainly we can talk a little bit more in terms of the details on the Q&A. So I'll turn that back to the team.
Thanks very much, Christian and Peter. I mean, there's some really great insight and advice here. Want you first, maybe we could start off with, it's very comprehensive, these crisis plans, and you had lots of information on the slides, but 2/3 of our members are small and medium businesses, and in fact, Greater Vancouver and British Columbia as a whole made up of a lot of small and medium enterprises. So when we're thinking about tailoring these to some of the smaller organizations, what would be some considerations that need to be put in place? And Peter, perhaps I'll start with you.
Thanks, Brigitte. And so all of these are scalable. And when I talk about having a crisis leader and the crisis team, that could be 2 people in terms of having an overall understanding of the organization and an overall understanding of exactly what different dynamics need to be put in place. Normally, it's not going to be just one person because this is an overwhelming bit of a crisis for all businesses. But in some situations, you could have a team that is very, very small as well. But it's still critical that you have a holistic view, that you've got something in front of you that says, okay, so if I'm making a decision that I've got to lay off staff, that I'm understanding that I've got an understanding of what the legal ramifications of that. If I'm working in a unionized environment, then what does that mean in a unionized environment? If I'm working with, and so we're not just talking about legal, but what am I talking about in terms of what are the financial implications of doing that as well? So, there's all of the implications to every decision that you're taking. So it's not a question of having 10 people around the table. Obviously, the more minds, the better, but it's not a question of just having 10, but so long as you've got that structure, that approach in front of you, and you're not just reacting to every little bit of bad news that's coming out the door. Once you've got a strategy in place, then you can move from being reactive to being more proactive and ultimately, being predictive in terms of what you need to do next.
Christian, do you want to weigh in here in regards to the significance or the importance of roles and responsibilities then in time of crisis?
Yeah, I mean, to Peter's point, there needs to be people that are in charge of this, that do have responsibility for what we're talking about in terms of crisis response. If everybody's responsible, then nobody's responsible, and I think that's one of the messages that we want to make sure that we're conveying. In terms of who's involved with that, though, I think it is a holistic approach of the organization, as Peter has said. We've seen, as you would expect, I think we've seen a lot of this scenario planning and contingency planning being done maybe out of a finance group. That's certainly where the genesis of these things occurs, but in terms of actually understanding what the scenarios are that are going to play out, this does have to be a group decision and a holistic approach. So it needs to involve all aspects of your business, not just from a finance perspective.
Peter, you mentioned that it's not too late to start now. I mean, many people are 2 or 3 or more weeks into this crisis. And so I guess intuitively, some people might be saying, well, it is too late. Now I'm just trying to catch up. So if somebody hasn't taken much action now and has been more reactive, what do they need to do this week?
Again, you just go back to that methodology that we put in front of you. And it could be as simple as that. And that's something that we're sharing with everybody on the call as well. So you have that as a takeaway, as just a quick reference tool as well. Just to say, when I'm looking at the specific issue or the decision that I need to take right now today, am I taking into account any other aspects of that decision around that wheel that need to also be taken into account? So it's never too late to do that. It's never too late to stop reacting on a daily basis and start, basically being a little bit more proactive to saying, I know these decisions are going to have to be made as I work myself around the wheel. I know that there are different decisions that need to make, and I need to know, and I know that they're going to be interrelated with each other. So if I need help, I can reach out to those people that I'm going to need help from to help execute on the plan or strategy I'm talking about. Because it's not really about putting a command structure in place per se, it's about putting a strategy in place. That command structure gives you that sort of framework to do that, but call it whatever you want. It's putting a strategy in place.
Christian, let's pick up and think about this maybe in the longer term view. So we are several weeks into this crisis. We are going to come out of it at some point. We don't know the timeline yet, of course, but what are some of those key points when we're turning towards recovery? What should businesses be looking for?
Well, I think that there is no doubt that we're actually going to be coming out of this. The question is, of course, when are we going to be coming out of it? The fact is that there's going to be some strange numbers that are going to be coming that you're not going to be used to seeing. But we need to project those numbers through a certain period of time to understand what our capability is to not only cope and survive during this time, but also potentially take advantage of opportunities in the future. That's something that we're also talking to our clients about, is making sure that you, although are going to stop your discretionary spend and you're going to postpone all of your expansionary capex, there is going to be an opportunity where you're going to be presented with possible acquisition targets that you didn't actually think were going to be available to you. It's going to be something that comes out of all of this, and I think companies should be prepared to not only just delay your capex expansion, but start to think about how you're going to get yourselves into a position where you're going to be strong enough to take advantage of those opportunities, because we will come out of this and there will be opportunities down the road.
So it's being focused both on the immediate, on the present and the immediate needs. So you were talking about that cash flow analysis, you know, really looking kind of 2 weeks out or maybe 4 weeks out, but then also taking the time to look longer term as well.
Definitely, definitely. Peter, did you want to say something?
Well, it was just that the immediate problem is not going away anytime soon. So this is a crisis of a death by 1,000 cuts. And so, but it is always having a longer term view of what could be happening next. And so and what's coming down the pipe. And as Christian rightly says, this isn't forever. But we don't know when, how long it's going to last, and how many more cuts we might be seeing or we might be having to take. So we're not out of the response phase yet, but we know that the response phase doesn't last forever.
Yeah, and Bridget, if I could just add to that, I think the other part of this is that you need to do that diagnostic for your specific sector. We all know that there's going to be sectors that are going to be much harder hit during this episode than others, and certainly in British Columbia that has some major implications when we start to think about hospitality, we think about restaurants, we think about tourism-based industries. So the key is understanding your unique situation and what is going to transpire under this particular challenge, and preparing yourself for the short term, but also for the long term.
Great, thank you. We're going to go to Slido and see some of the questions that are coming in from some of the viewers who are taking part here. And as we're transitioning over to those questions, we'll just maybe head to the first one here. What will be some of the common mistakes that companies are going to make in handling this crisis? That is a great question, because this is so unprecedented, we are all learning as we go here, no matter how much you have prepared or you have run through scenarios. I don't think anybody could have prepared for a crisis of this scope and magnitude. Sure.
The common mistakes that I see in this crisis are no different than the common mistakes I saw during the, I was going back as far as the Boxing Day tsunami to the Japan triple disaster or what have you. But the common mistakes that I see is that, as Christian said, if everybody's in charge, no one's in charge. So you need a direct line of authority within the organization, irrespective of how large or small it is. Unless everybody's working on the same path towards the objective, then you're going to end up with making a bunch of self-defeating decisions along the way. The second thing that I would comment on as a common mistake is not making decisions. The only thing worse than making the bad decision is making no decision at all. And so you need to be able to, because no decision at a time like this is going to be perfect. We're going to be faced with a series of imperfect decisions as we move through this process. Christian, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a number of different things that you need to do right now, and make sure that you're in a position to make the best management decisions that you can. The key understanding is that as we've been saying, is you probably haven't seen this before. And so you're not going to necessarily fall back on your experience of seeing these types of cyclical situations before. And so that's going to take some very serious analysis. It's going to make sure, it's going to have a necessity to make sure that you are keeping apprised of all of those different types of supports that government is putting in place, and then understanding what the macro and microeconomic factors are that are going to affect your business. Not easy, but what's required for sure.
And I think this next question talks about this speed over perfection. And I'm going to actually broaden the focus to both provincial and federal government, because we have seen both levels of government on our televisions day in and day out, several times during the day sometimes. And last week we saw that there was the 10% wage subsidy this morning. Well, actually last week, 75% this morning, more details on that. So what are your thoughts about how both levels of government have been handling this crisis?
So I'm not advising the government with respect to how they're handling it. So my knowledge is limited to basically the same as everybody else on this call likely. But I have a lot of sympathy, given how many of these matters I've gone through as well. I have a great deal of sympathy for those that are at the center of something like this. Again, we're constantly being made aware of new bits of information, and it's a slow evolving event to making extremely dramatic changes in the lives of every member of our society. So all of us are being asked to make tremendous sacrifices in our lives, and the ability of any organization to manage through a process like that is extraordinarily difficult. So in many ways, they have followed some of the basic tenets of what you would do in a crisis management response. You would have one specific individual in charge of the overall response. You would layer all of the other stakeholders around that individual and feed that information back into the center, so that the best decisions can be made around the information that you have on the day that you have to make that decision. I'm just saying that based on the information you have, they're the best decisions. In 2020 hindsight, when we look back at all of this, there's going to be a lot of decisions that not only the government made, but businesses made, that all of us made, that were not the best decisions given how this is unfolding. Anything you want to add, Christian?
Well, I just really quickly, I'm certainly not advising either government either. However, what I will say is that, our economists will tell you that 65% of our economy is based upon consumer spending. What I'm seeing from all levels of government here in this country is to make sure that they're putting supports into the pockets of individuals so that they can continue to spend on the things that they require from a necessity perspective. That, I think, is good policy and seems to be going in the right direction.
I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. It really is about what those most pressing needs right now are for small and medium businesses, more are those sort of those sized enterprises. What are the top 3 things that those businesses should be focused on right now over the next 3 months? And Christian, maybe I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, well, I think it's that diagnostic, top to bottom diagnostic and cash flow, understanding where your cash is coming from and understanding where it's going. So, at the end of the day, an income statement is fairly simple. There's revenue and there's costs. Understanding where your revenue is coming from on the short term and the long term is critical, and matching that up against your costs, particularly your variable costs. Managing your variable costs as best you can. The other thing is that even on your fixed costs, there's opportunities for negotiations with your lenders and with your landlords and with others. So make sure that you're having those conversations so that you can get through this in partnership together to the other side.
Peter, do you want to add anything? Oh, we can't hear you, Peter. For some reason, you're.
I just think that Christian handled that question effectively.
Okay, a couple other questions I want to get to before we're out of time is really talking about. I want to go to the bottom here. Whether you're foreseeing a lot of M&A to happen once this is over, particularly because cash flow is such a problem right now for businesses.
So I'll put my opinion out there. I think that there's going to be a tremendous amount of cash in the system. I think we're already seeing a lot of cash in the system. So I think that there is going to be opportunities for deals in the future. Unfortunately, you know, there are some firms, some organizations that are going to be in a tough spot, and they're not going to be able to get through this the way that others will. So those companies that are in a more competitive place right now in terms of their cost structure are going to be in a better place to take advantage of those opportunities in the future. And there will be. We've seen that, and we see it constantly in whatever sector you experience a downturn.
Peter, you have been through many crises, and so what would you have to say to businesses, those leaders that are trying to manage emotions through times of crises? That was a question that came up on Slido. But you know, is there something? Are there tools and techniques, or what have you seen that has worked well trying to manage the emotion aside from the business decisions?
So these are extremely emotional times for any organization, and it takes a steady hand at the helm. But it's communication, and it's impossible to over communicate at a time like this. Like, we go back to the common mistakes. I see this time and again that there's a paralysis that many organizations find themselves in, that they don't know what to say, so they say nothing. And when you don't share any information with any of your stakeholders, they just go in and they fill the gap with the worst case scenario they can possibly imagine. And so if you're a small business owner or a medium-sized business owner, it's communicating with those stakeholders, communicating with your staff, because these are the people that once the social distancing is lifted, or you know, the restraints are lifted, that's what you're going to be looking for. You want to look at an early warning. It's going to be an early warning of a recovery is going to be mall traffic. It's going to be traffic through restaurants. And those are the first early indicators that we'll be looking for in terms of recovery.
And I just want to pick up on that, because that is one of the questions there at the top. And maybe, Christian, you want to maybe just expand on that a little bit from a macro level. What are some of those key turning points to recovery that you'll be watching for?
Well, we're going to be watching for spending for sure. I mean, there's all kinds of forecasts out there in terms of what we're going to see in terms of a contraction of the economy here in BC. Prior to entering into this episode, we were looking at probably about a 2% increase in terms of the economy. I think we're suggesting that it could be significantly contracted by 7 to 11%. So you can see that is a very significant change in a very short period of time. So we're going to be looking to see what kind of consumer spending. As I said, it makes up 65% of our economy. What kind of consumer spending is out there once the immediate rules have been lifted in terms of being able to actually go into those stores and be able to purchase items. It's a significant aspect, and there's a number of different indicators that we all know of in British Columbia in terms of our big economic generators in the natural resources sector, the price of those commodities, what's happening with those prices of commodities. Those are very, very big aspects of the British Columbia economy, and so we're going to be acutely aware of those commodity prices as well.
But one of the leading indicators and the most immediate indicators that things are turning around might be counterintuitive, but it's traffic congestion. So right now our traffic congestion is at 16% of normal levels. We should all be dreaming of the days when we have to line up to go across the Lions Gate Bridge, because when we get in those lineups, then we know things have started to get better.
I have time for one last question, and knowing that crises continue to happen when we get back to a state of normal, there are other crises that are going to happen, hopefully not of this magnitude. But what can businesses do to prepare for future crises? And Peter, I'll start with you, and then Christian, you can add in as well.
Sure. And so what I would say is that if you did not have a crisis plan in place, no matter how remedial, no matter how basic that plan might have been, this is a good time, once things return to normal, is to put that plan or create a plan, a playbook about these are the things that I need to do on day 1, on day 2, on day 5, on day 10, that sort of thing. But put a plan in place. It's not necessarily the plan won't survive the first crisis that you encounter, but the planning is such an important exercise to go through because it makes you and your organization or your business more agile in response to any type of crisis.
And Christian, what would you have to say about some steps that people could take to prepare for any other crisis?
Well, I think that what we're seeing is that there's some organizations that are better prepared than others, and really that comes down to your competitiveness from an enterprise profitability standpoint. So we've had a lot of great years in British Columbia. We've seen continued growth over most of the last 2 decades. I think being acutely aware of your cost structure is very important. Understanding what your variable costs are that may not be as necessary as others. The other thing is that we've gone through a tremendous amount of deal making. So there has been a lot of mergers, there has been a lot of acquisitions, but what we do find is that those necessary integration steps to maximize the potential of your synergies that you've taken steps to apply through acquisitions, they may not have been completed. And so we're leaving money on the table, so to speak. Has your organization completed that integration work, that post-merger integration work that allows you to really be as competitive as you possibly can?
Christian and Peter, thank you very much. Some great insight today, and really do appreciate taking time, especially when I know both of you are also managing crisis with clients as well. And for anybody who missed part of this webinar, you can watch it again by visiting boardoftrade.com, and you'll find the recording there. Now, to continue this important conversation and stay connected, we'll be hosting a series of free webinars on navigating COVID-19. Over the next few days, we'll be bringing together experts to speak on accessing government funding, especially important in these days, and also adaptive leadership. We have also created a business resource page designed to provide planning toolkits and information to businesses and individuals who are navigating the COVID-19 crisis, and you can find that at boardoftrade.com. This page will be updated as new information becomes available, and we will continue to find and create resources to help support you during this time. Thank you to everyone for being part of today's webinar. We look forward to seeing you again soon, and to echo the words of one of our favorite healthcare heroes is Dr. Bonnie Henry, our Provincial Medical Health Officer. Be kind, be calm, be safe.